Uh-huh.
Okay, let's get started. Check, check. Okay. Okay, let's get started. It is 6:30 p.m. and I'd like to call this meeting of the Community Development Committee to order. While this meeting is being held in person, in consideration of the ongoing COVID-19 health concerns, we are offering the option for the public to participate through Zoom if preferred. Instructions on how to attend virtually are included in the City Council calendar item listed on the front page of missionks.org. The public is also invited to participate in the meeting. If you are participating through Zoom, please either add your comment in the chat feature and it will be read out loud, or note that you would like to speak and we will call on you shortly to make your comment verbally. Please remember your comments or questions are visible to everyone in the meeting. If you are part of our in-person group tonight, please raise your hand but stay seated and we will call on you to go to the lectern to make your comment. When you make your comment, please state your name and city of residence for the record. Also be conscientious of others trying to speak and speak slowly and clearly. This meeting will be recorded and posted on the city's website at missionks.org. Please contact the administration offices at 913-676-8350 with any questions or concerns. Ms. Folks, would you please call the roll?
Thomas. Here. Boltinghouse.
Here.
Loudon. Here. Ryard.
Here.
Crane.
Here.
Josie.
Here.
Davis.
Here.
Thank you. Our first item of business tonight is public comment. Is there any member of the public who would like to comment now on an item that is not on our agenda tonight? Very well. We'll now proceed with our regular agenda. We have one presentation on the agenda this evening, a discussion of the request from John Moffett for tax abatements for the 58 Nall project. Ms. Smith, will you please introduce this item for the committee?
Thank you. I think you'll all remember Mr. Moffett. He's been before you on a couple of occasions presenting on his project 58th and Nall, which is a 77-unit multifamily complex at the corner of 58th Street and Nall. It had been through had a preliminary development plan approved. Final development plan was platted and last year. And as Mr. Moffett, and he's here this evening to kind of explain to you what has transpired since the final approvals of his plan, as he's worked to move towards working with a general contractor and looking at costs associated with building that. So we asked him to come this evening. He has not yet submitted a formal application for tax abatement, but has expressed his interest to staff in exploring that option and pursuing that option with the city. So we wanted to just give him the opportunity to kind of share some additional information with you all. And then we'll think about how best to calendar that formal request if he does decide to proceed with that. So with that, I would invite Mr. Moffett up to kind of share. He doesn't have a formal slide presentation, so I'll be happy, I'm sure, to answer any questions you'll have throughout his presentation.
Good evening, and thank you for having me. I'm very fair skinned. I was redhead growing up. I didn't use any sunscreen, so I saw my dermatologist last week. So she's like, "You need to put this chemotherapy cream on." So I did, and she told me to put it on my forehead, but I didn't listen real well, and I put it on my whole face. So I look like a mess. So I'm going to take this off so it's easier to talk, but that's why I have this on. So excuse my appearance. Thanks for having me back again. We've been working very hard on this. It's almost a year ago to the date that we purchased all of this ground. And in that year, let me just step back. The reason we purchased this ground is we've been looking at the city of Mission for a while, and we think there's a need for new housing. And I may have said this before, but to be very clear, we don't create demand. We try and do our best to identify a market, determine there's a market exists, and then build a product that fills that market. Okay. So it isn't like we come in and we plop stuff and then they come. It's like, if we do our homework right, it works right, and everybody's pleased. And we believe there is a need for some new housing in the city. And one of the things that we identified in our research was that the locale, which is basically the newest thing that's happened here in the last 20 years, has a ton of amenities, and it's a big thing, and it's got pools and all this stuff. But in our research, we determined there's a lot of people that don't care about that. They just want a nice new place to live, and they're not trying to make friends. They're not trying to have, a community swimming pool where they can go out on a Saturday and have a barbecue and meet people. And so that's what we've brought here. And we had many neighborhood meetings. We had a lot of meetings with the architect. None of you know this, but in that, there's only 77 residences in here. And in there, we have 14 different floor plans. So I'm actually, I have a reputation for being a perfectionist and a micromanager. And so there's nobody that would do that insanity, but we did, because I wanted to be right. I want everything to be right. So that's very unusual. We've met with the planning commission. We did the neighborhood meeting. We've met the city council. I mean, we've done everything. We've got our drawings are 100% complete, bought and paid for. They're into the city for review now. I think next week will be the first week we'll get the first round of comments back. We actually just got addresses assigned by the county Monday, I think. So we're in this. We're not jacking around. Everything's done with utility companies, gas, water, electric, all of that stuff's done. But I'm going to just give you a couple of numbers. This is the reality. 1 year ago, 3.25%. Who can tell me what that was? It's got to be a little interactive here. Come on. That was prime interest rate. A year ago, prime was 3.25%. Our business borrows at prime +1. Okay. So a year ago, we were at 4.25. Okay. When we ran this, we knew things were a little bit, you always got to project. I mean, the problem with my business, you got to be projecting where things will be in 2 years and 3 years. And so I think we ran everything about 1.5 points above that. All right. So that was probably 5.25, maybe 5.75. Okay. So that's 3.25 1 year ago. So you can tell me where prime interest is today. Okay, so does everybody know who Jerome Powell is? Okay, so Jerome Powell is single-handedly doing this, all right? And he has said, I'm going to sidebar real quick, but this was at Thanksgiving. He was at a fundraiser at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., and they recorded this thing, and he actually said, real estate has had a major bubble, and I'm going to take it down. You can go find this. And it's like, I can't believe this guy's on this agenda. So anyway, so 7.75 is today's prime. 7.75. So it's 150% more than it was 1 year ago. 7.75. And they're projecting, because he's going to do another increase. Okay. They're projecting that he could take prime up to 9. All right. So 9 + 1 is 10. We ran ours at 5.25 or 5.75. So anyway, we're having a major problem with that, making our math work. And in talking to staff, the best resolution we can possibly come up with, or otherwise this goes, we're kind of at a big crossroads right now. And we don't want to stall this thing out, but we won't have a choice. The other number I want to give you is 10%. When we started looking at this, our construction cost estimate is now 10% higher than it was a year ago. So you take the money is 150% more than it was a year ago, and you take the construction costs at 10% more. So now we kind of have this perfect storm. And there are a lot of other developers in the United States of America that are just putting everything on timeout, on hold, or walking away from things. Okay. And we do not want to put this on timeout. We do not want to put this on hold, and we do not want to walk away from this. So we need your help. And that's really why we're here. We want to be a part of the community. We think we've done our homework. We think this will be an asset to the community because it's the right product at the right location at the right time. And we need your help. And so in talking to the staff, that's what we've come up with. And we would like you to have an open mind and work with staff, and let's all come to some resolution so we can get this thing going. Because the way we are with everything else, I mean, we could see this thing started this summer, which means we could be open, 15 months. So we could, by the fall of next year, we could have people moving in. So thank you for your time.
Any questions or comments from the committee? Councilmember Kring and
Have your proposed rents changed as a result of the prime going up and all these other factors?
Well, that's a great question. We've tried to make, I don't like to pick on the locale, but I have to. So when we underwrote this entirely, we tried to target about 15%, no, let's say 10% below locale. They've raised their rents. Our last pro forma that we did, and we're working with a company called JLL on all of the money on this. I think we raised them 3%, but we haven't raised them 10% or 15%. So we're still at least what I consider the market for this, which would be your locale. We're still, depending on our unit. So again, I go back to, we have 14 different units here. So we have a much bigger unit mix. This isn't just a tract apartment thing with, 5 floor plans. Okay. This is 3 times that many. So our more affordable ones, and I was actually talking to Hunt Midwest 2 days ago about this and one of theirs. And he was shocked that our units were the sizes they were, because he said his average unit was 720 square feet. And he goes, I'm looking at your on the students in 1 bedrooms. He goes, you're 850. Why are you so big? I go, well, that's probably because I stupidly tried to micromanage the architect. And everybody said, oh, this would be nice. Add this and this. And so anyway, to answer your question, no, they haven't gone up much, but they have gone up a little bit.
What is the rate? What is the range of rents?
We're trying to target 190 or $1.90 a square foot. Sorry. $1.90 square foot is where we're trying to be. We had some at like 185 or $1.85, and we had the bigger ones that were closer to $2. And if the locale, they're probably averaging 2.25 would be my guess.
Which equates to what monthly? A range?
oh.
The 1 bedroom to the,
The studio probably 1,000, 1,100, all the way up to maybe big one, probably around 2,000, something like that. I mean, I can get staff all of those numbers. Not a problem. We have all that.
So Councilmember Loudon? Good? Okay. Councilmember Davis?
What is the ask at this point? What is your ask?
Well, in our discussions with staff, we are looking for, we had already kind of covered under the IRB application, the sales tax exemption. But so now this is for tax abatement. And that's what we're asking for, is tax abatement.
And I have a question.
Okay, Mayor.
So at least in recent history, Mission hasn't done tax abatement projects. We've done, TIF and CID and other things. But my understanding from reading some materials is that can be up to all of the property tax for up to a period of 10 years. Do you have a sense of what your ask is going to be in that range, both time wise and percentage wise?
So in working with staff, I think we were going to stagger this. To go back to the original ask, it was a full abatement for 10 years. Okay. But staff said that isn't going to work. So you need to go back. So in talking to JLL, that's the money group. I think we were able to do maybe a 100% abatement for the first 4 years. I think 75% for the next 4, and then 20, and then 50% for the last 2. I think that's where we were. So it's a staggered break. But staff could probably tell you better where we ended, where we've tried to hit. But in a perfect world, we would get 100% for 10 years.
Yeah, and I might, once you get the rest of the questions out, and then I'll kind of share some information about just activating in general, since it isn't a tool that we use, and kind of where we are. I think there's another question.
Yeah. Councilmember Thomas?
Thanks. What would 100% for 4 years? What's that total? Do you have just start?
So let me.
Okay.
Let me jump in.
Okay. But I have got a couple other questions, Laura. So if you want me to do those first. I
So
can-
don't ask, we specifically advised them. We said we weren't ready because we haven't done the analysis and worked with our financial advisor to really know what their formal ask might look like. And so this evening, that's why we ask, and they have looked at a variety of different options. But I'll kind of come back to that, but we have not, and they have not submitted a formal application with that. So we haven't done any of the projections on our side in terms of what that would look like.
Okay,
Nor have we seen their pro forma with those calculations. So
sure.
But we are prepared to move quickly once we have kind of a green light that this should be doable. So I want to point that out. at our last meeting, we had our tax attorney here and we've got all of our pro forma people here. So, I mean, it's to everybody's benefit in this room to kind of get a go, no go. We're at this major crossroads and we've got to kind of try and get this through.
So John, my other question would be, this council has had a somewhat kind of unwritten policy regarding incentives, at least as it relates to TIF, that we typically, apply them with discretion and consideration of affordable housing or sustainability. And I'm just curious if either of those elements are possible at this point in your project, if that's something that the council was looking for.
If that's what we need to do, we will roll up our sleeves and see if we can do it. Because we want to do this and we need to. And so we're definitely open to that if that's what we need to do to get this moved forward.
So the mayor next.
Yes, Hillary kind of covered it, but I did have one follow-up question. So the way that you presented it a year ago, this was a project that was feasible without incentives. So I understand why you want the project to go as soon as possible, but as the governing body, why wouldn't we consider, waiting it out for a year and potentially letting the market, equalize? What's your reasoning for why we should want to go right now, with the tax abatement?
Well, that's a great question. And I think you have to look at the overall dynamics of what's happening within the city. I think having something go into a timeout is not a real good thing for anybody involved. And my understanding is there's another developer that's looked at the city of Mission. He's gone into timeout. And the guarantee, there's no guarantee if you go into timeout either. And if my business is so impacted by external forces. If you put this into timeout and it gets worse and worse and worse, it's like downtown Kansas City. I opened an office down there in 2004 and it was kind of a war zone and everything started going and then the whole thing went on timeout. Well, it's finally downtown Kansas City now, 15 years later, it's finally getting some momentum. This is the right size project that if you would consider it, it would give a good step. It's close. I've visited every single shop up and down the parkway here. And they're all like, and I ask them questions. I go, well, tell me about your clients. Who's here? The coffee shop, the beer guy, and he describes them. And I go, well, do you think if there was some new little residences over here? Oh, that'd be perfect. We need that. That's what we need. We need people. Oh, where? We're like, oh, I've been over right here off of Nall. And oh, that'd be great. That's what we need. We need people walking up and down these roads. So the timeout just doesn't solve anything. And if you go into timeout, then you're just into a limbo. And if you go into limbo, who knows? Because Jerome Powell might continue nuts and then we're going to an election cycle. The thing is, if we could have these residences available for occupancy next fall, that's a huge plus for everybody. It just is.
Councilmember Kring.
Well, I'm going to speak for myself. I'm not speaking for anybody else. I have a big concern about tax abatement issues overall because we have several apartment complexes that are coming to us with applications, as well as some small 8-10 unit apartments that have been here for 35 years. What's to make someone else not want tax abatements? I think this is a real slippery slope and we don't have our attorney here tonight, but that's a concern to me.
And that's a very valid concern. So I would go back to Kansas City, Missouri. Okay. If you look at what they did and who was the mayor that was a CPA before
Funkhauser.
Right, Funk. And he was a great guy. And I had an office down there and I met him several times. And he was very, very like, but then all of a sudden they started giving some, you really need to look at what creates growth and what benefits the city in the long run. So, and I remember Funkhauser saying the same thing, it's going to be a slippery slope. It doesn't pencil out. We got to have the revenue. And now here downtown KCMO is 15 years later and look at what they've got going on. And now they're talking about the Royals ballpark moving down there and look at the tax abatements they did down there. There's a ton of buildings down there that had 100% tax abatement for 20 years. Okay. So that's what helped it happen. So this is what creates the synergy. And especially when you're in economic conditions that you can't really do anything about, that's where you got to look at and say, okay, what's the benefit? It's far better off to give that. So you've got the people here going into the coffee shops in the mornings and the restaurants in the evenings. than have that whole, now you got the whole corridor going stagnant. I don't think anybody wants that.
Well, with all due respect, you can't compare Kansas City to a 2.5 square mile, 9,000 person residential community. You can't, there's no comparison. Like,
Well,
Yeah.
if you're just talking about quantity, of course not, but it's still the same thing.
but
It's
it does
people's
not address
lives.
My concern about setting precedent. If every apartment complex wants the same consideration, that's a concern to me because that tax money is how we keep going. So I'm just saying.
No,
it's a
I think
concern.
that-
It may just be me.
No, it's a fair question. I think what you've seen, I think historically, many of the communities in Johnson County were not using tax abatement. They were using, it was done on a much more limited basis. Kansas City, Missouri has used it extensively. And I think over the last several years, as we've understood it and talking to some developers, some of the requirements and conditions that Kansas City, Missouri has placed on developers or sought from the kind of that partnership that they've sought in exchange has caused people to start to look elsewhere. There are a number of communities in Johnson County who have used and are using tax abatement. In fact, just this week, I had an email from the city administrator out in DeSoto to our Johnson County Managers Group saying we have approximately 1,300 multifamily units currently in the pipeline for development. And every single project has asked for an incentive of some type. What are the rest of you experiencing? What are your policies? We have a tax abatement policy that was put in place years ago. It's very brief and I think limited. And we've been reviewing, in fact, we had a conference call with Pete Heaven and Bruce Kimmel and Kevin Wimpy and Brian and I earlier this week to kind of talk about, we've been researching other policies and thinking about what might align if this is something that if this is a tool that the council was interested in. And one of those things that we talked about was precedent. So again, I think as the mayor referenced, tax abatement is a 10-year, up to a maximum of 10-year and up to 100% abatement of all taxing jurisdiction revenues, with the exception of the 8 mills of capital for the school district. So that's the only thing that's preserved. And TIF, there are a couple of other things that are preserved. So shorter time period. And it's really anywhere from, again, 0% to 100% over that 10-year period. There is still kind of a but-for analysis that would need to occur once Mr. Moffett or any other developer would submit an application would be similar to the analysis that you've seen Ellers do on the Gateway, Mission Bowl, any other project, the locale, anything that we've done, where it has to meet that threshold and that test to say, but for the use of the tax abatement tool, this project would not reasonably expect to be built or constructed. And, Mr. Moffett is right. We have a couple of developers. I think Mission Preserve has sort of cooled the jets on, they don't have any plans on when to move forward with construction at this point. The Mission Vale. So we're seeing kind of a mixed bag at this point. We know that in our initial conversations with the Block Group and their property that they purchased over off of Broadmoor, they are seeking the plan approval, and then they're kind of in a holding pattern to kind of see what happens with the market. We have the Mission Vale Townhome project that had final development plan approval and final plat this past Monday night, and we expect that one to move to construction. But I think that's part of why, we asked Mr. Moffett to come back and just sort of share with you where he is and why he's asking for it. We do need to quickly, because as we've talked about the Mill House project, which is the project that is to the east of the community center, both north and south of Martway. And you've seen some preliminary pieces of that. They've indicated that they would intend to bring forward a request for tax abatement. So I think, and I think while sometimes that feels frustrating, I think that in conversations with our own land use and development attorneys, and in conversations that Brian has had in some of his networking groups, I think if you talk to a development attorney, they would tell you if they aren't bringing forward that request on behalf of their client, they don't feel like they're doing their due diligence. So I think it's important to, to be transparent about the things that we would be concerned about and make sure that as we evaluate that request, that we make sure that we're protecting and preserving those things that would continue to allow us to provide basic services to whatever new residents would be coming in as a part of that project. So it's hard sometimes. I understand it because I've had some of the same reaction, in all honesty, and Mr. Moffett will tell you I've said that, and I told him he could probably expect or anticipate that reaction from some on the council, because you feel excited when you have a project that kind of goes through the process without the request for incentives, right? And some of that I would contend is we may want to reevaluate how we do our process. Many other communities don't have, we've tried to run a request for incentives and the planning approvals on a parallel track. Many communities, you have to get all the way through to the point where he, final development plan approval and start getting those construction cost estimates. And then you come back and ask for the incentives because you have a better handle on what the numbers are. They're real numbers at that point. So we've done it in some ways in the past that maybe have set us up to sort of feel some of that frustration. But I think there are ways that we can work through that and let you all feel like you're, fairly and effectively evaluating any of those requests.
Did I see Councilmember Thomas?
Thank you. To Laura's point about our process, I think part of the value of our process is that there is the room for negotiation here that maybe you don't have quite as easily in other cities. And so we have this opportunity to say, these are our expectations, at least with other incentives or economic development tools that the city has used. And for me personally, I don't really view this much different than any other economic development tool, including TIF. Obviously, the numbers have to shake out and make sense. But for us as a city, I think it's, what does the city get? And so for me, that's where I am. And so I'm open to the idea. And that's where I am.
I see Councilmember Kring again.
This is what I anticipate and what my expectation is. If you looked at the full analysis, I need to know all the apartments we currently have who've been here for years and years. Why would they not think it's like for like? It's the same situation. We have some of the mom and pop ones that don't have the full pool. They don't have all the amenities. They just have standard houses, laundry facilities, and things like you're offering. They're not brand new. They're also less costly on a rental month by month basis. I need to know how many we have, because you did a matrix for me that showed all the apartments, how many current units we have, what the impact is on a tax abatement across the board, because you've got to be fair. Why would one person get it and one project not, if it's virtually the same product? And so before the full analysis is done on a personal level and a professional level, I'd like to see exactly how many tax dollars we would be missing over a 10-year period from every apartment complex we have within the 2.5 square miles.
Councilmember Boltinghouse.
Thanks. I had a question for Laura, just on the mechanisms of tax abatement. We were speaking about some of the veto power differences between tax abatement and TIF. Could you just recap some of that again for the
Right.
body?
And I've been working for the last several months to educate myself, because it isn't a tool that we have used, but it is not in the TIF. I think you're all familiar that when you establish the district, at the time that a TIF district is established, the school district and the Board of County Commissioners have the opportunity to veto that. And so they can sort of stop the formation of that TIF district. That has not happened in our creation of TIF districts in the past. With tax abatement, it is a different process. So you provide notice to the school district and the Board of County Commissioners, but it is not something that they have the ability to veto. Eventually, as you work your way through the process, the Board of Tax Appeals ultimately sort of grants, and it's a long, convoluted process. The mayor can tell you there's a white paper that we're working on, a sort of tax abatement 101 presentation, because it will put you to sleep. but there isn't that veto power, upfront. One of the things that we talked about, with Mr. Wimpy from Gilmore and Bell, because they do several of these projects, and are familiar with many of the jurisdictions on both sides of the state line. I think you could expect there would be some on the county commission who would express opposition to the use of the tax abatement tool. But they don't have any formal, the discretion and the decision happens ultimately at the BOTA level. And from what we understand, I don't think that's something that is regularly turned down.
My reaction is kind of like Debbie Kring's reaction. I'm really reluctant to support tax abatement unless I see some value to the city. It seems to me that is really not a slippery slope that I would like to go down at this point in time.
Any other questions or comments? Councilmember Loudon.
So Johnson County definitely has a need for more housing. That's a problem all over Johnson County, and it just seems to be getting worse. So I'm not opposed to it. I just do want to, let you know that, we will be asking for maybe some low income housing within the complex. Talking to you about the sustainability. You said that you're open for that. These, the price points that you've offered are still pretty high. And I get, that it's a new building, it's a nice building, and, that's what you need to make this all work. But, thinking about this from what does the city need? I mean, it does need more apartments, but it kind of needs more affordable apartments.
We will do everything we can to get there, but this is new construction. The affordability is going to come from the older tired housing that Councilman Kring was talking about. I'm not sure what they would be coming to you for tax abatement, because that's not new construction. This is a whole different, those are two different animals. But I would just close with this. And this is just like Funkhauser and Barnes. Funkhauser's like, well, we're going to lose revenue. Barnes comes in and goes, but look at the revenue we're going to get. Look what's going to happen when all this starts happening. Look at the big economic picture here. We're going to have people, because those businesses don't survive without doors. And we're bringing the new doors with the new people that are going to come in and have the discretionary income to spend. And that's what the whole corridor needs here. That's what they need. So we've got to just think this through. And that's why we're trying to get a go, no go here is the whole big picture here, which we'll submit, and then our financial guys will get with your financial guys, and they'll either bless it or say no. But that's the whole thing is, so we forego a little bit here on the front, but we're going to get all of this more in the back. And that's what Kansas City, Missouri did. And that's what we should all be looking at here and saying, okay, we're going to lose this, but our guys haven't analyzed it, and that's okay, because we're going to get all of that. So it isn't like you lose the income, you replace the income. It's just a different revenue source. And there will be more because of the revenue generated by consumer spending. I'll finish.
Laura, can you go over the difference in terms of tax increment financing? I thought that the city has no stake in that in terms of if the increment occurs, then, they benefit from that tax increment financing aspect. In a tax abatement, we're taking the risk of that, are we not?
Potentially, you still have the opportunity again to negotiate. It ends up being a payment in lieu of taxes because you're abating the taxes, but there is the ability, right? So as you're referencing in a TIF project, you have that increment. So you establish a base year when you establish the district, and you are guaranteed that you are sort of held whole with that level. So there's a way to approach a tax abatement process and a tax abatement incentive similarly. So I think, again, it's anywhere from 0 to 100%. We can look at all manner of things that align with council values, community benefits, and impacts as we would look at this.
And Councilmember Ryherd.
Yeah, this is for Laura again, and forgive me for being green, just wanting to understand this process, but abatement can only be used for new construction, correct? So like an already established apartment couldn't come back and be like, we're just going to peace out for a couple of years and not like we want you to approve that. So I just want to be sure that I'm understanding like concerns from everybody correctly.
I don't think that they have the ability to do
Okay.
that. But that's
I
something
see
that will
Brian.
certainly, is Brian not, they don't,
Yeah.
correct?
Okay.
Yes. Just new construction. And to be very candid, many of our older apartments were beneficiaries of residential industrial revenue bonds at the time that they were originally constructed. And so, for example, we've been approached by one complex in particular over the last year or year and a half to seek potential incentives. And we've had to go back to them and say, you still have IRBs that are outstanding. And until such time as those bonds would be retired, you aren't eligible to make any other request for incentives. So there might, if the city were to create some other sort of mechanism for rehabilitation or reinvestment in those, that's something that we would consider, but they can't come back and ask for these same types of incentives as an existing property.
But we still have 5 projects pending that total probably 1,300 units altogether that could each come in for that. Is that correct?
Well, I mean, we've heard that, with the block project, which is 330, that they would anticipate asking for an incentive of some type. That property is currently in an established TIF district. They haven't, again, indicated whether they expect to apply for the incentives or which incentive tool they would explore. The Mill House project, which is just over 200 units, has indicated that they would be planning to make a request for tax abatement. The south side of that property, which they have under sort of option or contract, which was previously or is currently owned by Christian Arnold's group, that's in a TIF district. And so we would have to, if you proceed with that and were to approve a tax abatement with respect to that project, we would actually dissolve that TIF district. And then you would apply that tool.
Mission Bowl.
Mission Bowl, I mean, we created that TIF. And so that's already been established. Mission Gateway, Mission Crossing, the locale. I think those are the big projects. The preserve hadn't intended, I don't know whether the preserve would come back and ask for that.
They've not asked to date.
They have not asked to date.
Could a tear down and rebuild of a house qualify for a tax abatement?
There are actually some tax abatement tools, which I believe fall under the Neighborhood Revitalization Act process, and we haven't established neighborhood revitalization areas. Those can be both residential and commercial. So there are communities that are using that tax abatement tool to encourage reinvestment or I don't think in that situation in a neighborhood, I don't think it has to be a complete tear down and rebuild. I believe, are you familiar, Brian? I think it is an improvement of some sort that a portion of those taxes are then abated. And we many years ago talked about that the neighborhood reinvestment areas as a potential economic development tool, both in our commercial and our residential areas. And we didn't have any really clearly defined goals or objectives at the time. And we felt like, that would be something that might come later as we looked at our targeted specific areas for redevelopment.
Councilmember Boltinghouse.
Thanks, Chairman. I'm not crazy about kind of reopening this after thinking we had already kind of established it on good footing and moving forward. That said, it does sound like there are some things with our process that through no fault of Mr. Moffitt's might want to be looked at again to continue to make sure that we don't kind of find ourselves in this situation again, especially if other developers are kind of hinting that they might be coming back, especially after we thought we were kind of in a good spot there. So perhaps we can look at his numbers, and at the same time, perhaps we can also figure out, if there's any tweaks to our process to, because it seems like it's obviously got some loopholes that are being, could potentially be coming back. So
I think there's some things that set up frustrations that might not need to be frustrations if we're just clear about, what our expectations would be. So.
Mayor Flora.
Yeah, and I know we'll get more into this later, but since we're sort of setting the stage, I was wondering if you or Brian could maybe briefly explain the the policy or statutory differences with the TIF and the tax abatement. My very basic and possibly incorrect understanding is that TIF is, closely tied to blight remediation. You have to meet certain statutory factors at the time that you're establishing the district. Whereas the tax abatement, like the fundamental policy, is about economic development and overall economic benefit to the city, even after you take out that portion of the property tax. Am I getting that
Yes,
right?
Yes, you are. So keep going. That's great.
Okay, so I know that Mr. Moffett mentioned, that they believe their project would, generate more benefit to the downtown business district, et cetera, than what they're asking for seem to be the general message. So I was just going to suggest that as we're revisiting our policy, that we look at a way that we can be asking projects to measure that and, sort of prove that up.
Yeah, that's something I'd echo for sure, is take a more holistic look at what the impact of a development would be if the idea of the tax incentive is economic development. Well, let's try to have, at least an eye towards that and feel informed about that, because I agree, with Mr. Moffett. I think the idea that, bringing density residential closer to Johnson Drive could do a lot of good for some of these shops that are consistently, for lease or empty. And I think we'd all like to see that. Not saying that, it's definitely a good idea here or not. I think as we all understand, it's in the details, and the folks that we trust on the city staff will help us understand that better. But I definitely, I like the idea of having more people around to spend money in sort of our core business corridor. So any last comments or questions on this item? Laura, are you good?
I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we will move into our action items for the evening. The first action item is the acceptance of the meeting minutes with Robin Folks. Any comments or recommendations?
I recommend that we take this to consent. I want to say thank you for Robin for making the minor corrections that I suggested. Thank you very much.
Okay. And next we will consider replacement of the lamp projectors in meeting rooms C, D, and E at the community center with Penn Almany. Hey, Penn.
Hello, good evening, Mayor and Council. Good to see you this fine evening. So we've got 3 projectors that get pretty consistent and heavy use throughout the course of the years.
Sorry about that.
What's that?
We've been using them quite a lot.
Yeah, you guys have witnessed it firsthand. It's been wonderful. There's kind of this void now that on Wednesday evenings, it's a ghost of the councils that were there.
But come back until 9:30 and 10 o'clock, I feel like.
So back in March of 2017, these projectors were put into use. They are lamp projectors, which is a technology that's quickly outdated and moving towards the LED and some laser technology. So all of the features and elements that originally benefited the community center are now no longer viable. We're seeing that it's close to its useful end after 6 years. The life expectancy on these models is 5 to 7. We've been fortunate. We had a maintenance agreement with the original installers who also do our digital interface at the community center. They've done a wonderful job keeping us up and usable over the years with little downtime to patrons, but we're experiencing a little less vibrant picture, a couple other elements that aren't easily corrected. So staff is recommending 3 new projectors with liquid crystal display that will work seamlessly with our existing digital interface system. And we got the installation is going to be at the back of the room as opposed to the projector lift system. So we're getting rid of that maintenance headache and utilizing the technological advances that have accompanied the last few years. So it's only going to help us on a maintenance side. It'll decrease some of our PM schedules. And we're recommending this purchase and installation for an amount not to exceed $25,910 to be paid from the Parks and Recreation sales tax fund, which was approved by council last October for CIP budget use. It is important to reference that we saved $1,090 below our budgeted estimates from last year. So if council approves, we anticipate this being installed spring 2023. So here in the next couple months. Happy to take questions.
Questions, comments? Councilmember Davis?
Not a question, just I recommend we move this to council consent. agenda.
Okay. And next we have consideration of an interlocal agreement between Northeast Johnson County cities for the Super Pool Pass.
So we're before you today to renew an agreement that's been a longstanding practice for the city of Mission in partnership with Fairway, Leewood, Prairie Village, and Roland Park since 2009. We'd like to continue the practice of having a Super Pool Pass, which essentially allows members of those neighboring communities access to the Mission Family Aquatic Center throughout the course of the year. If they buy a membership at their home city and the Super Pool Pass membership. So the letter of understanding is essentially just to outline that if there's a swim meet in the local city, then residents who have that pass can utilize a neighboring facility for free. And staff is recommending approval of that for the 2023 season. I'm happy to take any questions.
Questions or comments on the Super Pool Pass or a recommendation? Councilmember Crane.
Just a quick comment. We've had great success with this, have we not?
We have.
So even if it goes as consent, I would like you to address it and just bring it to people's attention again, because I think it's a great opportunity and it may be buried somewhere in the newsletter or online that people aren't aware of it.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. Yeah, since 2009, we've generated $78,000 of revenue just in this partnership. That's not accounting for the memberships that we sell exclusively.
It's great. Thank you.
Any other questions? We have a recommendation for non-consent. Okay. And Penn, would you please make your presentation on the fifth action item for your proposal for fee changes at the Aquatic Center for 2023?
Yes, my pleasure. So over the past 2 seasons, costs have escalated, as we're well aware. We anticipate those staffing, chemical, and food costs continuing to escalate over this season and into the future. Keeping in consideration that we have not raised fees at the Mission Family Aquatic Center since its renovation in 2014. A lot of those factors have helped our subsidy or cost recovery dip a little bit over the last couple of years. So pre-renovation, the city of Mission was recovering about 30% of costs. Post-renovation, we were up in the 50 to 60% range, and we've dipped to 59. We've dipped to 51 as of last year. And so staff would like to get to a point where we're factoring in some of those additional costs, factoring in some of those safety and long-term elements into a model that helps us analyze those factors a little bit independently. So last year we had 401 memberships for a total of roughly 1,500 individual members. Now, we also have a daily pass rate for $7 that we were selling to individuals if they just show up the day of. And so we already had a model in place where people are paying for themselves. You know, a family of 5 would show up and pay 5 individual rates. But for the commitment to show up an entire season, you could purchase a family or a couple or a senior rate for a discounted amount. Obviously, some of those factors, costs, elements kind of chipped away at the efficacy of those membership rates. So staff is recommending that we consider the membership policy that Fairway and Leewood in particular have implemented and adopt an individual rate for the membership model. So they would essentially look like rather than purchasing a family pass, a family of four would purchase 4 individual passes. And we understand that there are significant cost savings. If you could purchase, family of 4 could purchase a pass for $120. If you, depending on the rate, showed up, that same family of 4 could pay, if it was $50, they could pay $200 for that same family pass, right? So staff took into consideration the financial impacts of families as well as the financial benefits to individuals, and is recommending adopting a lower individual rate that would kind of transition us closer to a cost recovery model that's sustainable in the long run, but doesn't impact a family too much. So before you was a memo that estimated if we drop the individual rate from the current $70 to $35, that would net the city roughly $11,000 in positive net increase. So for the families, that would equate to about a 17% increase. That's a family of residents. A family of non-residents would equate to roughly 42% increase because their rate's going to be a little bit higher, So if you look at the family or the resident rate would be existing rate is 70, half of that's 35, which would be our recommendation. The existing non-resident rate's 100, half of that would be 50. That would equate to 17% increase for residents, family residents, and then a 42% increase for non-resident. So with that consideration, there's also the fact that the market is driving it a little bit higher. So Fairway, Leawood, their numbers are around $40 or $50. Prairie Village is 50 in particular. So we don't want to have a run on Mission's aquatic facilities just because it's the low cost provider, but we would anticipate raising that cost for the 2024 season a little bit closer to that market rate. So staff's recommending that a net increase of $11,000 to our bottom line. That would help us get a little bit closer to that 50% cost recovery for the 2023 season. That would initiate a process by which we would annually evaluate some of the adjustments in membership costs over the course of the year and act appropriately. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
I did just, if I might, I would just clarify, and Penn and I didn't have a chance to catch up. So the adopted 2023 budget actually shows an estimated cost recovery for the outdoor aquatic facility of about 55%. So I think the memo was a little bit confusing and looking like potentially that increase in revenues didn't cover the associated cost increases, but many of those had already been built into the expenditure line items. So with that $11,000, we're actually above that 50%, we're moving closer if we hit those budgeted targets, which we think is realistic. Excuse me.
Councilmember Davis?
On the day pass, $7, is that correct?
Correct.
Flat rate for all individuals. How much is that used?
The day pass was used pretty significantly, but we've seen a lot of our return members just utilizing the facility repeatedly. So I would say there's a nominal impact for day pass users, because I think at the heart of your question might be, are we driving people to just purchase a day pass?
Correct.
Right. That rate wouldn't necessarily drive them to the day pass model. There's still significant savings. I think if you show up at our existing $35 rate, if you show up 10 times in a month, you're getting your money's worth.
I noticed that, is it Fairway and Leawood have a daily rate of 6 for residents, is that right?
Mhm.
And 9 for non-residents?
Right.
Is that something that you've considered or would recommend? Do you know what the percentage of day passes are non-residents versus residents?
I don't know that percentage, but I do know that they, at the heart of their conversation was how do we take care of our residents a little bit more? How do we incentivize priority to them? And that's one way you can do it is by, charging a little bit more. That'll help the non-residents, think twice about where they want to show up. My personal feeling is we want to make it easy on our team. One rate definitely makes communication really easy. When you have two different rates, there's an incentive to lie. And I don't know that we want to get in the weeds of verifying each individual with a statement on the day of. That just becomes a maintenance headache.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Councilmember Boltinghouse?
Thanks, Chairman. Just a couple of things. I'm glad to hear, I think you said every year we're going to kind of review the structure, like our cost structure, our cost recovery. I think, waiting 8 years between was way too long. I really would like to kind of build that in almost yearly. Just let's always kind of review and keep an open mind on that. 55% cost recovery, it still doesn't sound great. And just in my honest opinion, I'd love to see that get a little higher even. So if there's things we can do with like concessions and, more offerings there. And then I did have a question for you. I want to say the answer was due to just staffing challenges, I think, when we talked about this, but has there been any thought to considering staying open later in the year, considering the weather is usually pretty cooperative well after, the pool closes? Is it because of the school being back in session and stuff? Could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so pre-COVID, we actually did stay open later.
Okay.
And we have returned to utilizing those hours as part of rental bookings.
I think he's talking about beyond Labor Day.
Yeah.
Oh.
Later
In the evening.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. We have not considered beyond Labor Day. It's typically the end of the season. That's when a lot of the cooler weather shows up. Our staff is about 85% high schoolers. So it really, it takes away almost all of your ability to staff opening. So that is always a consideration. If we live next to really close proximity to a college town, that might be a different discussion. But we're kind of handcuffed in terms of the team that we've got in place.
Okay. And lastly, I do appreciate kind of the creative approach you all took to considering the individual approach. I think less is more when it comes to our memberships. We've even talked about the community center, just the smorgasbord of options. It's just too much, a simple, quick hit approach like this, I think works. So I'm happy to see that's what we landed on.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Councilmember Thomas?
Thanks. Just a question and a comment. We're still going to have the splash pad open for free for families during the
Correct.
week. Yes. Okay. I think that's just such a valuable asset to the community for folks that can't afford even a day rate or a monthly pass. I just think that's so wonderful. We do that. And then I would encourage us to consider maybe having one guest pass per month as a perk for like a family membership and advertise that. Just something to consider.
Yeah. I appreciate that. That's a good idea.
Any other comments or recommendation on this item?
Recommend we take it to council, I guess, non-consent.
Okay. And you've got all of them, don't you, Penny?
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, next action item is consideration of lifeguard pay adjustments.
Yeah, so it seems like just yesterday we came before you discussing this initially for the 2022 season, but here we are again. Inflation, a lot of factors in terms of finding people, peeling them away from other jobs that are higher paying. Lifeguard pay is paramount to everything we do at the outdoor pool and in conjunction with keeping the indoor pool functioning at the same time. So we really need a well-oiled team in place that's willing and able to accept the risk. And unfortunately, we got to pay a little bit higher to do that. So I'm before you today to share with you some details. We reached out to these 12 cities and the action item, 9 of whom got back to us, and all of them are increasing their lifeguard pay rate. So once again, we found ourselves a little bit lower than the mean. And we're asking, rather than the $2.50 increase that we asked for last year, just a $1.50 increase for this year for our lifeguards and for our captains. And this would be not just for the new hires, but also keeping in consideration of staff equity, raising the rates of those that are returning as well. Many of whom are well deserving of a merit increase. So obviously our retention benefited from us having a little bit more to offer them. They stayed on throughout the winter season, picked up weekend shifts, which was wonderful for us. This year, we have less need of finding than we did last year at this time. I mean, we've got 40 lifeguards on staff now. Last year, at this time, we had 25. And so we feel really positive about where the season is heading. So we just need to find a few more. And we're hoping that by doing this, we can keep those that we have from leaving other facilities. So obviously this has a budgetary impact. At the indoor pool, it would have a $9,999 impact for lifeguard and captain hours. And then it would also have an $8,869 impact in our outdoor pool just for those 3 months. We can absorb each of those costs within the existing part-time staffing line items, understanding that we foresaw some of this coming on the horizon. So staff is recommending accepting this increase in pay for lifeguards as well as captains for the 2023 season. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions, comments?
Recommend we take this to consent.
Okay. All right. And lastly, for the outdoor pool, we have an action item tonight regarding the referral bonus program, bonus program for part-time parks and recreation staff.
Yeah, so we were in a rough spot in the 2022 season. So we initiated a referral bonus program to kind of help jumpstart finding some additional interest in our lifeguardings. We actually utilized it for campers as well, since our camp staff, they don't want to work 8 hours a day with the same kids beating on them and hanging on them. So it was a good incentive to find those people that have that interest and invite their friends to come along with them and make it a little bit more palatable. So last year, it had a budget impact of $19,350, which was completely absorbed in our part-time staffing line item. Because we have so many returning staff, we feel that that impact is only going to be $13,000 for the 2023 season. And that can be absorbed within our existing line item as well. So staff is recommending continuing the referral bonus program through April 1st through July 31st. And for the 2023 season for a budgetary impact of $13,000. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Councilmember Loudon?
I just think this is a great idea. You know, happy employees getting their friends to come and join. And you have to be more creative this year for these, or, you know, these days for these lower paying jobs. So.
Yeah. There's no doubt there's a glint in their eye of a little bit of excitement when we find somebody who was not aware of that. And they're like, really? I can tell Tim to join the team too? And it makes it a little bit more exciting for them. And there's no doubt we've got a great culture in place. So once we answer the question of how much money they make, it's just well worth it for them to stay on board.
Well, and giving half the front and half on the back.
Yeah.
Does kind of add a little bit more loyalty to the mix.
Absolutely. Yeah, we've seen that. I think I mentioned in the memo how many times it didn't work for the people to capture on the back end, and that so it served its incentive. Most of our team got the full amount because they stayed on the entire duration.
Any other comments or recommendations?
Recommend we take this to consent.
Okay. And from pools to parks, Mr. Almany's last action item, consideration of the purchase of 12 picnic tables for Mohawk Park.
Last action item already. Thanks
Last
for
for
your-
you.
Thanks for your patience. So phase one is almost complete at Mohawk Park. We're pretty excited about that. We've got a great crew in place. The restrooms are coming, so drive by, check out. I think they're 9 to 10 blocks high now and have the concrete poured. Concrete tie-ins are all complete. They're about to stripe the parking lot, and you saw that the lights are in the parking lot now. So once those get hooked up to energy, we'll be in a good shape there. So last pieces are some of the finer elements that make it usable for us in the long term, one of which is picnic tables. So at the heart of any kind of rental or use is a picnic table, a place for us to stage our events, families to congregate around. And so we gathered bids from 3 vendors that we solicited from Confluence based on several factors. One of them was, are the tables heavy enough that they won't be thrown into the back of a truck and driven off? Is it a standard design that can easily transfer from a typical 6-foot family table to an ADA accommodated table without any design or look or feel that's different? Is relatively close design to our newest additions to Mohawk Park in terms of that same consistent brand. 100% recycled, no painting or splintering was an important maintenance as well as sustainability consideration. Having a 10-year warranty and then rated to 1,000 pounds. I think we've all been to parks and pavilions that have bent benches or broken slats in the table. That's one thing we don't want. Just creates headache in the long run. So once we got bids from those 3 vendors, Wishbone Site Furnishings was the lowest and most responsive at a cost of $2,422.50 each. The other 2 vendors, Victor Stanley and Inova Furnishings, were significantly higher, but their shipping costs were significantly lower because they're a little bit closer regionally. So staff's recommending the purchase of 12 tables for Mohawk Park, 9 of which will be standard 6-foot, 3 of which will be ADA accommodated tables for a cost of $39,220 to be paid from the Parks and Recreation Sales Tax Fund.
Councilmember Kring.
Do we have any little kid tables?
Little kitty tables? No, we do not have those in the final design. But we can take a look at that for the future. There was at least one playground rendering of a little kiddie table and access, but I have not seen that in all of them.
Councilmember Thomas.
I like the idea of kiddie tables, Debbie. That's wonderful. 2 questions. In the 2016 park study, it had this recommendation of having standardized park elements across all of our parks. And so I'm just wondering if these tables we're planning on using at all of the parks as we update them.
Yeah, I love that idea. Laura and I have talked about that at length. That was one of the first frustrations I had initially, was that every park had a completely different vendor list. And so there was no kind of scale that we could tap into in terms of replacement or parts, those types of things. So yeah, that's our long-term consideration is to keep these in each park.
Okay, great. And then my other thought or question is just that they're aluminum, and I'm just thinking about wearing shorts and the heat and the sun. And I'm just wondering if you would ask them about that, if it's some sort of heat resistant aluminum so it doesn't burn people's legs.
Well, I don't know about the legs are aluminum, but the slats are 100% recycled plastic.
Oh, good.
So we should not have any aluminum type burnings on your rear end.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ben.
Very important. Councilmember Boltinghouse, then Loudon.
This is really exciting and I can't wait to take my future child here. One question I had for you, and unfortunately I just hate to ask this, but I spent a lot of time in Roe Park and Overland Park, and they've had some problems with vandalism, especially related to the lights inside the restrooms. And I just didn't know if there's any design elements here that we've kind of tried to think through about making it vandalism proof, or if you've just thought about that and if there's any sort of precautions you've thought through on any of these?
Yeah, so lighting is obviously one of the best deterrents in keeping it lit for vandals. No one likes to do that when it's well lit area. So our pavilion, restrooms will be lit. We're gonna lock up the restrooms. I think we had discussed maybe keeping one open year round, but then still locking around 10 o'clock at night, just so that we don't invite any kind of overnight use. So those elements are in place. Plus, we have a pretty good maintenance schedule wherein we try to look for vandalism, take care of it, remedy it quickly. And that seems to be a good deterrent in the long run too.
Councilmember Loudon?
I just wanted to say that I appreciate the ADA accessible benches. I think that that's an important part to this park.
You bet. I'm happy to announce that the standard, the minimum was 1. And I figured that based on all of our discussions and just the pulse of our community, that we're not okay with just the minimum, that we wanted to welcome and embrace all abilities. And so that's why we got 3. You're welcome.
Any further comments or recommendation?
Recommend we take it to council consent.
Okay,
Thank you.
thanks, Pen.
You bet.
Hi, Celia.
Hello.
Okay, next we have a series of action items for street projects to be presented by Public Works Director Celia Duran. The first is consideration of the construction contract bid award for the Foxridge Drive from 51st Street to Lamar Street projects.
Well, Penn is a hard act to follow, so I'll try to do my best. As you know, the Foxridge Drive project is our 2023 CARS project, and the scope of work includes full depth pavement reconstruction, sidewalk and retaining walls, stormwater improvements, the traffic signal buyout and replacement at Lamar, streetlights and pavement markings. And based on our experience last year with the street project, we're a little gun shy of drainage issues and having to respond. So what we did is we hired a geotech to take some borings at the bottom of the hill next to the falls where all that stormwater collects. And it actually isn't just, it comes out of the hill too. So based on their recommendation, we added in some contingency funds and some grid and additional AB3. So we're hoping that solves it and that we don't have to do that in the entire project, because then, you know, we didn't plan for that. But we do have contingency in there. So I just wanted to let you know that we're hoping that that should meet our needs. The project was bid in January and we had 5 bidders, with BF Anderson Builders submitting the lowest and most responsive bid. And as you can see by the numbers, they were well below the engineer's estimate. So I think that they really wanted the project. I was thinking about why they were so low, but we had a bid on the street project the day before and they were really close and didn't get it. So I'm wondering if they sharpened their pencil to come in low. But anyway, we're happy that our budget is a lot closer than I feared. So we do have available funds in our various street funds, and our city administrator will be going over the street CIP with you, so you can kind of take a look at the projected funds and costs that go out to, I think it's 2027. So we talked to them today, and originally we were anticipating they would start in April, May, but they said the earliest would be the end of the May because it's going to take a while to order all the stormwater pipe. So, and they should be done hopefully no later than December 1st, because we want to get it all in before the weather turns so we can get it paved. There will be extensive traffic control and 7 phases on this project. So it's going to be really important that we have a lot of social media notification. Thanks to Emily in advance. So we'll have message boards at 51st and Lamar. And then we'll send out notifications to all the businesses along there every time there's a change. We'll probably just hand out flyers. Then we'll be working on messages to put on our website, and we'll notify all the property owners. We try to do a weekly update on our website, so notify them to go there. But the traffic control is a little confusing. So, for example, the very first phase is we have about, I can't remember if it's 5 or 7 stormwater crossings. And so we're going to have a a hard close at certain locations. They may do 3 of them at a time and then close the rest of it. So it's going to be confusing. And then the next 2 phases will be one-way westbound traffic. So they'll have one-way westbound traffic on the south lane. And then once they get that done, they'll switch to the north lane. And then because of some restrictions at 51st, it'll primarily be 2-way traffic, but there'll be a little portion where you won't be able to go 2-way right at 51st. And then that'll switch down to Lamar. So it's kind of confusing trying to figure out how to explain all that, but we'll try to do our best to make it simple. And JCW, Johnson County Wastewater, did a great job on their social media. So they handed out little flyers. So I may try to, work and see how we can do that to make it simpler for everybody. So we're really excited to get going, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Councilmember Kring.
How does this reconstruction work in concert with the preserve and the timetable that we're working on the preserve moving forward?
So the preserve is delayed, I believe, correct? Yeah.
For how long though?
We
I
don't
don't
know.
know.
Yeah.
Okay.
We've been talking about getting.
Yeah.
I keep thinking about spending all this money and make the roadway wonderful, but if they come in with all their dump trucks and hose and everything else, there's a potential that it gets kind of messed up.
No problem.
Yeah. And so as we know, 51st is not in good condition, and in case you haven't driven it lately, but we're still trying to work with, as soon as it meets that threshold of traffic, that we get it into our cars budget. I know, there's a potential to move cars projects around, but it doesn't quite meet that. I think it requires 2,500 vehicles per day. So we'll probably do another traffic count, and the minute, we meet it, we're going to go ahead and apply to cars to try to get that so we can pay for half of the road. But there will be, that detour will be heavily used. So we're going to have to really watch, the traffic on there.
Thanks.
Mhm.
Other questions or comments? And a recommendation?
Yeah, recommend we take it to council consent.
Okay. Next, we'll consider the construction inspection agreement for the same project with Mr. Ann.
So Pfefferkorn has performed many of our construction inspection services, including the Lamar project and our street project for 2020, 2021, and 22. And really, they're very cost effective, and they provide quality services, and they have a lot of experience, especially working in Mission. And so we would recommend approval of an agreement with Pfefferkorn in an amount not to exceed $83,980. That's based on full-time services, and the city would only be billed for the actual time spent on the project. We believe that this project is complex with a lot of stormwater improvements and traffic control. And so we're recommending full-time services. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions or comments?
I agree that they are very good. We'll go ahead and move this to consent.
And the final action item tonight related to the Foxridge Phase 2 project is acceptance of easements.
So Brent was planning to be here, but he couldn't. He had some child care issues, but he has done a fabulous job acquiring easements. So he went to 6 of the property owners, and he has signed easement documents. And then we have 2, it says 2 properties for Mission, but it's one big property with 2 different tracks that require drainage easements that would be signed by the mayor. And so once these easements are approved, then they'll get recorded at the county.
Any questions? Good with consent? Okay, next, Mr. Ann will present a series of action items for the 2023 street preservation project. The first of which is the construction contract bid award.
So it's hard to believe the 2023 residential street preservation project is here. It seems like we just got finished with the last year's project. So we have 4 streets this year. And if you look at the pavement condition indexes, they're all 21 to 26. So they're all in the very poor or almost failed category. And so Beverly Avenue from 57th to 56th, Riggs from 53rd north to Dead End, I called it 50th Terrace, but looking at Ames, it maybe reads, but the addresses are 50th Terrace, but it's from 51st to the city limits. So it's kind of finishing up that portion of Reeds that we didn't get done last year. And then 61st Terrace from Lamar to WOODSON. Riggs has, if you've been on there, they have sump pump and drainage issues, and it's an icy condition every year. So we're really excited to get that done. And then 61st Terrace, you know, that street is about to fail at any time. So we're excited to get that done as well. So the scope of work is similar to last year, where we have full depth pavement reconstruction, curb and gutter removal and replacement, and stormwater improvements. And so the two streets that have the most stormwater improvements are obviously Riggs, and then 61st Terrace. We're replacing those two concrete culverts, and previously some stormwater went between yards, and we're taking it down the street to the culvert. So that'll be nice that we don't have to worry about getting into people's yards. So the project was bid in January, and we bid it, as you can tell, it was complicated because we were really worried about it coming in on budget. And I don't know if you remember, but originally we designed the first three streets, and then we added in 61st Terrace later, and we knew it was kind of, you know, a little bit of a, well, let's see how the prices come in, but they are a little bit higher. But like I said, I think we have funds in the budget if you would like to go ahead and approve. So three bidders responded, with GB Construction LLC submitting the lowest and most responsive bid. So their bid is about $765,000 over the engineer's estimate. So what we do when we see that is we talk to the consultant and we talk to the contractor to try to figure out, you know, where's the difference. And what the engineers always do, they base it on the previous bid tab, so that if they have other projects, they go back and look at what these came in and bid, and then they try to adjust it with an inflation. So they're not as, you know, since they don't bid projects all the time, like the contractors, and the contractors know the latest rates. And when you're bidding in January, sometimes prices go up that you don't know when you bid early. And so what, in reviewing the bids, basically, the stormwater was the difference. And so the stormwater pipe was about 3 times more than the engineer's estimate, and the culverts on 61st Terrace were about 4 times higher. So when we talked to the contractor, he said, well, concrete pipe is really going up, and that's one of the reasons. It's harder to get and it's going up. Now, we didn't see that on the Foxridge project, but they have a lot more stormwater and a lot bigger pipe. And the other big thing was on the culverts. Olson designed it so it could either be precast or cast in place. Excuse me, but the end sections have to be cast in place. So all the contractors bid it as casting the whole culvert in place. And so that's how, what they, that was the big difference in the cost. GB is planning to start work in mid-April, and they're working on a schedule. And I know there's been a lot of residents that are really interested in what's going on. And I kind of wanted, I mean, I'm getting ready to update the website, but I didn't want to send out the letter till this is approved by council and when we get a better schedule. So we're waiting to do that, but I'm working on a letter to send out to the residents like we did last year. We'll notify them of all the project contacts, refer them to the website where we'll have weekly updates. And then the contractor will also be handing out door hangers and notifying residents. So I would be happy to answer any questions.
Questions or comments?
So I just confirmed with you that Miles did not bid from last year. They did the last year project, right?
Yeah. So Brent called them about 4 times, and we just got the story that the owner was on vacation, and the estimator's like, we're too busy this year. And so when the owner got back, he's like, well, why didn't you bid on that project? And so they somehow missed it. So they were planning to do it because they really like working in Mission, and they did a fabulous job.
They did. That's why I'm worried. Do you know much about GB?
GB has done a lot of our stormwater, our sinkholes, and they've done a great job, and they're really excited about it. So, you know, from the work that they've done, they haven't done a full street project for us, but all the work they've done, they've been on schedule, on budget. And
Yeah, I think the relationship to residents is really important,
Yes.
you know, and the communication that at least Miles did was excellent. So they have a high bar to reach in terms of
I know.
communication. So
Yes, and Brent's talked to the superintendent and kind of relayed all that, and he understands, and, you know, he says he's on board with all the notification, and that's our expectation. So,
okay.
yeah.
Well, I want to thank you and Brent for working on getting the easements, because I know that was not easy.
No.
So I would go ahead and recommend that we take this to council. Non-consent.
Yeah, I'd say regular agenda seems best here.
And I'm assuming, Laura, that we're going to go through the rest of it, then you'll present your spreadsheet. Okay.
I did just want to note, we put the last construction bid on consent agenda. That's 5.2 million. Is everybody all right with that? Yeah, let's put that one on regular as well.
That's what we do.
You want 5 million? Fine, okay.
5 million, 20 million.
All right. Next we have construction inspection agreement for 2023 street preservation.
So similar to the Foxridge project, we're also recommending going with Peppercorn on this project. They would be part-time inspection for 170 working days, and that cost would be amount not to exceed $58,650 for part-time.
We ready to recommend that one?
Yeah,
Take that to consent.
consent.
Okay. And now the final action item, which is acceptance of the easements for that project.
So again, I want to give kudos to Brent for working really hard. It's hard to track down everybody, but he did a great job. We have 16 properties that we needed to require easements, and 2 of the permanent sidewalk easements. Lamar, we needed to redo those ADA ramps, so we needed a little bit of extra sidewalk easement. We have 3 drainage easements, which are primarily one of the culverts on 61st Terrace was off, the easement was offset. So we had to go ahead and get a wider easement for that. And then there's one on Reed's or 50th Terrace. And then the remainder, we have 12 temporary construction easements. And those are primarily when we take out the driveway approaches and, you know, we're adding in the extra asphalt. So sometimes it changes the grade just a little bit. So to tie back in and have a proper slope, we go back and get the extra temporary construction easement. So that's what those are for. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I just wanted to mention that the property at 6204 61st Terrace, which is owned by House to Home,
Yes.
Casey, they are in the process of selling that. So the buyer may be somebody that you need to at least alert to what to expect. I don't know if that's been made known to the buyer, but it's under contract right now.
Yeah, and all of our dealings have been with the house to home.
Right.
So
I just kind of,
yeah,
just as soon as somebody moves in there, you probably want to get in touch with them, let them know, but
so we'll
what
send a
to
letter
expect.
to them, and yeah, we'll have
Okay.
to keep that in mind to let them
I'd go
know.
ahead and move this to consent.
Yeah, they're pertinent to the title. component there. Consent, okay? All right.
Thank you.
Ask a quick question. What Celia's
Yeah,
for.
Councilmember Craig.
Celia, is GB George Butler?
No,
Okay.
They used to be the zine. So the zine is gonna be doing the stormwater and flare outs, and then Phoenix is doing the curb, and then somebody else is doing the pavement.
Was GB the ones in my backyard for a year, or is that somebody else? Yeah, along the creek.
mm-mm. I can't even remember who did that. Gunter.
That's it, yep. all
Another
start with a
G.
G.
They all start with a G. So what we're looking at is the street program plan in the 5-year CIP. I think Celia mentioned, I know she really all fall and until the bids came in last week, has been really anxious and had a lot of sleepless nights wondering about where they were going to come in relationship to engineers' estimates and our budgets. And so after we, I mean, she's already shared the good news, but we wanted to just show you what that looks like in terms of the impact on the 5-year CIP and our recommendation to go ahead and proceed with, in particular, all 4 of the streets in the 2023 street preservation program. So just as a point of reference, this spreadsheet in front of you has now been updated with a couple of key things. You'll see that in 2022, in that first column in revenues, You see the debt proceeds that came in. Is it me? Like the,
It's digital radio.
yeah. Not a cyborg, I promise. The $3,585,000 in the 2022 debt proceeds that came in that we issued in December of last year. We've adjusted costs to reflect the actual costs incurred in 2022, the estimates, including the bids for both Foxridge and the 2023 street program. When you adopted this same CIP this past fall, we were anticipating a negative fund balance. We weren't showing bond proceeds, but we had a negative fund balance at that point in 2023 of $2.7 million. You can see now we're positive, even fully funding that at about $283,000. And so across the bottom, and I didn't have time to do this earlier today, but so we were actually had negative fund balances in all 5 years of the CIP. And we knew that because we knew we had the Foxridge project and the Lamar or the Johnson Drive project, Lamar to Metcalf, which were not projects that were able to cash flow. So both of those were going to need to be talking about debt issuances. So those ending fund balances, when we adopted this several months ago, were negative 2.7, 3.8, 4.7, 12.8, and 12.6. So if you look at what you see and what I've presented this evening, you can see that we've improved. And that is in part because of the debt issuance for the Foxridge project. Also tremendously in large part to the fact that Celia was able to secure $6 million in STP funding for the Johnson Drive project. We had estimated about 3 million. So we doubled that, which is fantastic. And so that helps that bottom line. So we've had a sort of street funding problem that we've known we're going to have to solve as we go along. It's gotten dramatically better, which is why we feel like we need to stay on track with the programs. I know the council has had an appetite of even trying to accelerate the street programs. So we definitely don't want to get behind sort of in where we are. But we wanted to, as we brought forward, particularly because the street program was significantly higher than the engineer's estimate and that $2 million, you know, that we budgeted. But I think the situation is improving. And every year as we get closer to these large projects, we're able to really refine and hone in on the cost and identify what we need and how we need to get there. So I think we have some flexibility in looking at that 889. So I'd rather solve for an $889,000 deficit than the $3.8 million we thought we were going to be solving for when we put this year's budget together. So I'd be happy to answer any questions about this. Again, I think as we move into our budget conversations, you know, we have opportunities to look at, you know, increasing. We talked a little bit last year about rather than setting that 7 mil transfer of property tax levy aside, that we wanted to really be able to evaluate what programs or which streets were in the program each year and maybe have some flexibility in that. I think in looking at sales tax, I think we've been somewhat conservative in terms of our sales tax revenues, although I think that there's a bill that has made it out of committee that would extend that exemption on food sales tax to local governments. And so we've been working this week to try to share information about how detrimental that would be to our community, in particular, because we have debt service that's tied to that sales tax. So there's a lot of things that we'll be watching as we move through this next year's budget process. But I think that the outlook is improving even with the costs that are somewhat escalated.
Questions? Yeah, Councilmember Green.
You've got one capital project here, which is Broadmoor, Johnson Drive to Markway, and it has nothing by it. Is that no dash, no money, no anything? Does that mean
It just
that's-
needs to come out.
it needs to come out?
Yeah, because we've done it.
I thought so.
So here's probably what happened is this spreadsheet has about 10 years prior. And so every year I hide the column and I just didn't go in and take that row out or hide that row.
Thanks.
Other questions or comments? Okay, Ms. Smith, are there any further department updates? Yeah. Yeah. Let's see. Okay, that concludes the agenda. It is 8:05 PM and with no further discussion, that concludes the meeting of the Community Development Committee. Again, this video will be made public on our website at missionks.org. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Chairman. I would let everybody know if you need to use the restroom, feel free. I'll just go ahead and power on to try to get through, considering the items on our agenda this night too. But it is now 8:04 PM or 8:05 PM, and I'd like to call this meeting of the Finance and Administration Committee to order. While this meeting is being held in person in consideration of the ongoing COVID concerns, we are offering the option for the public to participate through Zoom if preferred. Instructions on how to attend virtually are included in the city council calendar item listed on the front page of missionks.org. The public is also invited to participate in this meeting. If you are participating through Zoom, please either add your comment in the chat feature and it will be read out loud, or note that you would like to speak. We will call on you to make your comment verbally. Please remember your comments and questions are visible to everyone in the meeting. If you are part of our in-person group tonight, please raise your hand and stay seated, and we will call on you to go to the lectern to make your comment. When you make your comment, please state your name and city of residence for the record. Also, please be conscientious of others trying to speak and speak slowly and clearly. This meeting will be recorded and posted on the city's website at missionks.org. And please contact our admin offices, the numbers listed there with any questions or concerns. Ms. Folks, please call the roll. Here.
Here. Here. Here.
Here.
Thank you. We will now proceed with our agenda. Our first item of business is public comment. Is there any member of the public who would like to comment now? Okay. And we don't have any public presentations, so let's jump into our action items. And the first action item is the meeting minutes with Robin Folks.
Thank you. Draft minutes of the February 1st Finance and Administration Committee meeting are included for review and acceptance from your document.
Acceptance, yeah, sounds good. Consent. Our second item is consideration of an animal sheltering services contract with Chief Madden with Melissa's Second Chances.
Thank you. With recent developments concerning the potential of the state revoking the license of Unleashed, we were in a position where we needed to find an alternative for our animal sheltering services. We reached out to the two known private animal shelters. Only one could accept new clients. We did our due diligence through the Department of Agriculture to look at their inspection reports. Also did a tour of that facility and found it satisfactory. And their terms are very similar to the terms that we had with Unleashed. So we recommend that we enter a contract with Melissa's Second Chances Incorporated. It's located in Shawnee, Kansas, for our animal sheltering services going forward. Okay, yeah, we've been going back and forth through some revisions with our legal team and just other aspects of it that needed to be cleaned up a little bit. So we'll have those revisions reviewed by our attorneys and the vendor to make sure that they are in agreement with those. They've been really easy and wonderful to work with. So I don't anticipate any problems, but those final revisions will be reflected in the council meeting packet for March 15th.
Thank you, Chief. Are there any questions? Yeah, I saw Debbie and then Solid.
Is it legally permissible? Do we ask what's the status of Unleashed right now? Or is that what you were referring to?
That's our understanding that the state has determined that they're going to go for revocation of license of Unleashed to operate as the kind of business they operate as. We don't have any timeframes or any further details about the process is a little confusing as to what that time frame would be.
Do we know if they lease that building and it's owned by someone else? Or they own it? They own it. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, I just wanted to disclose for the record that I do foster dogs for Melissa's, but I don't get paid for those services.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yeah, Kim?
No question. You ready for,
Sure.
recommend that we take this to consent.
Yeah, that sounds good. All right, and Chief, we have you up next too for the MOU between Johnson County Mental Health and the Northeast Johnson County Cities for co-responder services.
Yes, as part of the second co-responder, a grant was received to pay the lion's share of that, and I believe that that will be continuing. But the grant has been audited. And so in order to make the MOU compliant with the grant language, there was just some revisions that needed to take place. Doesn't change the substantive, it's just some changes to make sure that it's in compliant with the grant terms.
Any questions or comments from the committee on this item? Yeah, Kim,
Take it to consent.
Thank you.
sounds good. Well, that was lightning quick, so I guess we could have taken the bathroom break after all. But, discussion items, that concludes our action items for this evening. We do have 2 discussion items. Our first discussion item is 2022 year-end project status update report from Laura.
Yes, thank you. And we had this in your packet last month at your meeting. We said we'd spend a little bit of time on it this evening. So I want to hit a few highlights, be happy to answer any questions, but then I also want to preview and talk a little bit about the work session and talking about some preliminary budget goals for 2024 that we'll be having ahead of our March 15th City Council meeting and just kind of talk through some things. So I think, again, we're still working to compile all of the successes for 2022, but I think they have been tremendous. And we've tried in our quarterly status updates to share the successes that we've had along the way, because I think it's important to not save those all up until the end of the year. But as we look at this, what's included in this report, these are really just highlights of the fourth quarter. The first one in successes and accomplishments we just touched on, and that was kind of the cartwheels that we've been turning up for that $6 million STP grant. We've been, we've talked a lot through the years. I know this council has an interest and it encourages us to apply for grants wherever we can. We've secured almost a $400,000 grant for the Mohawk Phase 1. We have a grant application pending of about that same $450 for Streamway Park. We should have that determination. We secured the Planning Sustainable Places grant for $100,000 for the study of that Rock Creek corridor. We were successful. We think it hasn't formally been awarded, but we actually scored higher on our second PSP. You'll remember that our city planner presented that there were leftover funds on the Kansas side. And so we made application for a bike ped plan. I think we scored 80 in the 80s out of 100 on our first PSP application and 91 or 92 on the second one. So the likelihood that we'll get funding, and that was $70,000 total for the bike ped plan. So, and then that doesn't include the CARS funding that we received, the SMAC funding that we've received. And so we've not had opportunities where our projects have matched up successfully with any of the federal funding opportunities that have been available, but we continue to be researching and exploring those and looking at ways to use other people's money to help us get those things done. I think the progress that we've made between the Johnson Drive Rehabilitation Project and that reconfiguration of Johnson Drive, the Foxridge design and the work has been really exciting. So you all have read these, but I think in every category across all of our departments, there's been a lot of really great things that have been going on and continue to go on. And we all have a lot to be proud of. One of the things I did want to touch on, and I think you all know it, but planning activity was really at an all-time high in 2022. I think planning land use development applications was the highest ever. Brian, is that correct? In a single year, I think he says with head in hands. So we had 38 planning commission cases in total. And that was a tremendous undertaking. And those have been some big projects, including the wastewater treatment plant and the Rushton Elementary rebuild. But they're great investments in our community if we can see them come to fruition. And so, we have, as we've talked about earlier this evening, we've got some projects that are maybe slowing, and we'll see what happens with those in the coming months. Community Development Department issued 377 building permits with a total valuation of $42 million. The actual number of permits was about 6% less than what we issued in 2021, but the project valuation overall increased by 62%. So we have a meeting Friday with our annual meeting with the appraiser, where they start to preview what they think our assessed valuation for the coming year is going to be. And so I'll be happy to kind of report, bless you. But I think we're going to see some continued growth. But we'll be able to report that. So there's a lot of detail in here about just some of the projects, our neighborhood assistance and our grant programs. We've shared information here on the new businesses that came in the fourth quarter, but we've also incorporated that. If you've noticed, we've been sharing that in the Mission Monthly as that has come out. Code enforcement activity, even though we didn't have the neighborhood services officer's position was vacant between March and May of last year. You can kind of see that the average number of cases in code enforcement has been pretty consistent over the last several years. We shared some information just on Parks and Recreation revenue comparisons. You'll see that we are trending in the right direction in terms of revenues at the community center. The largest increase really being driven by the miscellaneous category. And you'll recall that was a child care aware grant that Jenny Smith and Penn were able to secure that helps to offset the costs primarily of our summer camp program. And I think when we were talking about it, we have a lot of weeks that are full already with registration for this next year's program. So program that's always very well received. We are scheduled, Penn and I have a call tomorrow with the pros consulting team. We've got a draft of the feasibility study, and we'll be scheduling our next stakeholder group meeting. And then you all have, you'll recall from your calendar on March 29th, we have a work session where pros will be here to present their recommendations coming out of the feasibility study. So I know that has been a long time coming. One of the things I was sharing with Councilmember Boltinghouse when we did agenda review, and he's also on the stakeholder committee, is that Ben and I have spent a tremendous amount of time with the consultants. This is much more data driven than how we have managed the center in the past, and recognizing that and the stress that may cause in terms of introducing that. We've been spending a lot of time really working to understand the models, the business plans, the tools that we'll be recommending and bringing forward, so that we don't have a study that we've invested this time and energy in that then sits on the shelf and we don't see the results that we want to see. So you all have been waiting usually patiently for comp plan and this, and we're about to turn it all loose on you here in the next couple of months. So there's a lot on both fronts with the comp plan behind the scenes. Parks and Recreation maintenance activities, just kind of listed, you've seen us with the transition to that full-time park maintenance technicians position and then that reclassification. And I think they've been interviewing folks. Have you hired anybody yet? Yeah, we're having lots of interviews, haven't necessarily hired, trying to beef up at least a part-time staff to supplement the work there. We've got Broadmoor Park Trail, Mohawk. Penn kind of shared the update on Mohawk Phase 1. We recently awarded the design contract for Mohawk Phase 2. So that will be in progress. We've got the design contract for Waterworks Park. We've had at least one meeting with the water district, Water One, our staff and the design team. And I think it's going to be a really exciting kind of process. So we're looking forward to all of that. So in addition to several projects that we completed this year, in addition to the things that are sort of outlined in progress on the matrix, the Anderson Park tennis courts. And if you drive by those tennis courts almost any time of any day, there are people using them. And it's so exciting I mean, it's really exciting to see. We had the successful renewal of the dedicated Parks and Recreation sales tax, completion of the facility conservation improvement program. We're now sort of working through the dashboard. We had a meeting last week to begin to sort of understand the dashboard and the results and how we measure and communicate those going forward. I touched on the Johnson Drive reconfiguration. We had our successful bond issue, and just a continued emphasis on doing a better job of providing you with data and status updates on kind of what we're doing. I'm certainly not going to touch on every project in the year-end project status update, but you'll see there that there are, in addition to the development applications that we've had, there are people that are interested in this community, and whether that is work that we're spending on, Big Biscuit, that there are things that are sort of in the pipeline that are slowly moving down, other improvements that take time and effort and energy. So it's been, I think we aren't seeing a slowdown in that quite yet. I think so there's a lot in terms of development. I know we've talked about we adopted the 2018 building codes, and then we're working through a process and a calendar to bring back some recommendations related to review and of the 2021, specifically energy code. Comp plan update. I think we've sent invites to you. We have 2 joint work sessions scheduled with you all and the Planning Commission, one on April 10th, and I believe the second one is on May 2nd. I think we'll need to, if we get through everything we need to in that first one, then you'll get a free evening in May. And then once it gets through that joint work session, I think targeting final adoption by the Planning Commission in July. I don't have that right in front of me, but I think July. So there's a public notice. They have to hold a public hearing, and then that will come to you. I think we are almost through the full implementation of municipal court software, with online payments going live last week, which was really exciting. Talked a little bit about between the feasibility study and all of the work and construction work anticipated and sort of in the pipeline for our parks. It's keeping Penn. He's got plenty to do. He was able to successfully hire recreation coordinator's position or make an offer last week, I believe, or 2 weeks ago. And so we'll be bringing that person on board. We still have 1 full-time vacancy at the community center. We're sort of holding that as we talk about and move through the recommendations coming out of the feasibility study. We talked a lot tonight about street asset inventory and street maintenance program. We have the updated PCI inventory that will be coming forward later this spring. We don't expect a major upset of the apple cart, but that will give us an opportunity to really look at, we haven't seen that, those PCI numbers. Celia is also working on developing stormwater criteria to help us evaluate and plan for and budget stormwater projects that are what I call, in many cases, they're bigger than just a backyard project, but they're not in our major creek channels or associated with the street projects. And so we have several places around town where those have been identified. And as we have more stormwater funding available, and as SMAC allows us to fund some maintenance projects, we're hoping to be able to bring forward this spring the criteria and a recommendation for a program and how we start to incorporate those in our CIP program. You awarded the contract with the consultants for the greenhouse gas inventory update. There's been a tremendous amount of work on Emily's part to work with the consultants to do data collection. And we would expect for them to be back with a report out on that in April or May, probably late April, probably a May meeting. So the departments have been really responsive in getting the information that we've needed. So that's been time consuming, but I think we're making good progress on that. Most of these we've sort of talked about. The chief is working on, we hope to bring forward in April the contract award for the automated license plate readers. And then in the time between when we award that contract and they actually get here and we install them, we know we'll be bringing back a policy for you all to look at in terms of their use in our city. And then we've just kind of the everyday stuff. I'm happy to answer any questions, any highlights. And then I'll talk a little bit about next week or 2 weeks from now.
Councilmember Davis, then
Laura, where do we stand on the other positions that are vacant? Like, don't we have a building inspection?
So we have a building inspectors. Yes, thank you. I meant to cover that. So you authorized a building inspector in the 2023 budget. That position is currently posted and we're accepting applications for that. We had a mechanics position that was available in the Public Works Department and it was a little slow going, but we were able to make a successful offer the first of this week for a new mechanic. So we're finalizing the background process for that and expect that individual to be on board. And then next week, we will be interviewing candidates for the budget and finance manager's position. So the last several weeks, there's been a lot of time spent on the job postings and making sure the job descriptions are reflective. And then I'm sorry, we also have in anticipation of a retirement that will be occurring in a police records clerk position. Emily has been working with Dan and Rob Myers in the police department to kind of look at, and we have a current vacancy that we've been holding in municipal court about how we can, with the implementation of the new software and a variety of other things, be more efficient and more customer service focused. I think there's some great things that they've been tackling. And so there's a public safety clerk's position that was posted this week that you may have seen. We'll report to our lead court clerk, but the expectation will be that there will be crossover and there's been some tremendous support. And I think in the conversations that have happened. So I think there's a lot of sort of internal organizational development type things that are happening that don't always bubble up to the top that you can see. So thank you for asking about that. I did mean to touch on that, on those positions.
A couple of things. It would be really helpful and I would totally appreciate it if maybe every other week or so we could get an update on current businesses coming in and ones that are exiting the city. Like status on Big Biscuit, any new developments that are coming in that you're aware of that have been permitted and don't have any questions
Yeah.
behind them. Because that's, if anything constituents ask about, it's, oh, I saw so-and-so open. Why didn't the city tell us? So that's just a question. If it, if you're too busy every other week, maybe at least monthly to have an update on what we're doing with projects.
Well,
I know.
yeah, and it's in your mission monthly and we can, so how would you like to see that better? Do you want something separate to, I mean, we struggle with that. When a business leaves, we don't always know until the next year when we go through the business licensing cycle. I mean, some of them, obviously the very visible ones, we know. So we've really been working on trying to figure out what is the right time. So when somebody comes in and usually they're going to touch the building community development department first. But sometimes they get started and then we share that information and then something falls through. So I know that has been a longstanding, request of yours. And so I don't know what the best way to do that is. I don't think if we can't do it weekly because there's just not enough information to come out. So we can continue to kind of look at that and share that, but we've tried to be more transparent and share that more frequently in a variety of different ways.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
A suggestion, and Popeyes has been closed 3.5, 4 weeks now. Could we not ask them to put the signage up because there's a potential traffic problem? Once somebody comes across a light, if they can't go in, then it stops people that go backwards. The tape is down. It looks tacky as can be, but it would be so nice instead of saying we're hiring, how about we're temporarily closed or closed until further notice? That way, if you're on the other side of Broadmoor, you can look up and you can see the sign up there and you don't go in it. And I don't know, what our role is, but I don't have a problem calling them if that's needed. And one other comment, years ago, when we've kind of done surveys down Johnson Drive with some of the businesses and we've talked to them about a variety of things. Susie did this quite a bit on her own, but did we ever have like an exit interview process where if somebody's leaving, we know if they're just economically deprived, they're mad at the city? Is there any way we have any feedback to know why people leave?
And we don't have a formal mechanism for that. I think we've had some, it's been more inconsistent, again, not a formal structure. And I think that's something, we had originally talked about kind of having that retreat or work session on economic development. And we still need to get back and get that scheduled. And I think that would be one of those things. We had the business forum in November. We sent out a business survey to approximately 300 of our businesses. We extended the deadline for response to that, and we ended up with 13, which is great. One of those being a business that is no longer operated. They got it and they answered some questions. And so we're kind of compiling and summarizing all that, and we'll share that back with you. But that's just been our ongoing challenge as well, is to engage. How do we engage them? I think we had good attendance at the forum. We thought, okay, if people can't come to the forum, it will be easy. It's a short, pretty straightforward survey. And then to only have, 13 businesses who responded to that it feels discouraging to a certain extent. But yeah, I think we know some of the things we heard at the forum in terms of some of the landlord issues. I think there's some things that we need to sort of compile and come back and say, how do we want to tackle some of these things?
Thank you.
Mhm.
We talked about surveying the residents after the projects were done on the neighborhood streets. Did we do that? And
Mhm.
do you have a opportunity to maybe tell us how that went? Maybe not today, but sometime in the future.
Yes, I have some of them keep coming in, so I have them all, but I haven't been able to file them yet.
Okay.
They're all I quickly looked through some without really high marks on construction, quality of service, notification of construction. We got a lower mark on information in terms of the audit process, and so I'm kind of taking that, but don't have a lot of information up front.
Right.
And so it's like, do I put more on the website? Do I have a public meeting? It's just a rehab project. So those are some of the things, but the general, they're really good. The design part of communication was
Okay.
lower.
Thank you.
So yeah, I have it on my list. Of
Okay.
things.
Thanks.
They are still trickling in. Somebody literally ran their survey in last week to City Hall and handed it off. And so
thank
it's
you.
great that people want to do that.
I know that when we had the forum with the businesses, one of the things that came up was the landlord issues, and we talked about maybe meeting with landlords of Johnson Drive. Is that still something that you're thinking of doing, or?
Yeah, I think we
integrating
need to figure out the best way to approach that, and where we have incentive, where we have carrots and sticks that can help kind of move that needle. Part of it is, we're aware of some, but there seemed to be a lot more undercurrent of that issue that came through in the business forum that we need to understand a little bit better. So we need to circle back and figure out what we need to do there.
Okay, I have a second question too. So one of the things that we heard at the business forum was that, okay, so here we all are meeting and we're discussing this, and then what? So are we doing something after?
We'll have to follow up and say, what are the programs? So a couple of things immediately. There was, and do you want to talk about this because you know better, and you'll say what it is so we really did some immediate follow-up.
Okay.
And we've tried to communicate that and the changes that we've made to, for example, the Mission Monthly, and to be responsive to that. So.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've internalized in just messaging is that there needs to be more external effort shown in that sort of relationship. So just sort of hearing the sentiment and understanding that we need to be more obvious about the ways we are supporting. And so we've tried to do that through social media highlights. The Mission Monthly just got a new business section, and the first month of the year happened to be a chance where we had a couple of ribbon cuttings that we were able to then, echo. We always do those. We're participating in that, but then echo that in and even extend the invitation to a couple of the openings. That just was coincidental that there happened to be those opportunities that we could highlight that way, but just more intentional about the things that I think we have been doing, but we could be better at. Then we did hear the business directory on the website we used to have long ago. We felt like in the era of Google that wasn't a key piece that we needed to move forward with, but that's missed apparently, according to the business forum attendees. So it's easy enough to do. And so Robin has been like updating our records. It doesn't quite export the way that we like it. So we're still kind of working on what's the best way, but we did have a goal for Q1 having that up. We'll be close, I think. So we are moving forward in that. I think we have plans to do other things. It's really difficult. I think Laura said somewhat discouraging, and I think they even among themselves would have echoed some of that. I do believe that the tenant landlord issue, even just to become more aware and even just versant in the kinds of issues that they're seeing, I think would be a really smart move for us to be in. But we have tried a lot of different things, and it's been hard to get kind of buy-in. So I feel like we need to keep working to find the real right match. But I do think we don't have a specific economic development program. So if we want to engage in that, we'll have to really talk about it intentionally. But there's a lot we can do if we choose to. But I think some of it was just really emphasizing the good intentions that are already present, and then trying to just capitalize on those in ways that ripple, in ways that really can be felt by the folks up and down the street.
So a lot of those have been subtle. But as Emily said, we were trying to be more intentional. One of the things that was also included in your packet and we've shared with you is we've been much more intentional this year for a variety of reasons in trying to build out a master calendar that helps us communicate with the businesses. It helps us be able to share. That includes all of the special events that we're planning. I think we can do a better job of using that and looking at that whole year and communicating and coordinating and where we have events where we can support, kind of support one another. So we'll continue to work on that. So I'm going to touch on the calendar, and then I'll come back to kind of what we anticipate, preview a little bit of the meeting on. So the calendar, it will be a work in progress. We've also built an electronic calendar. And what I think we would do, with your permission, is go ahead and just send you all calendar invites for those council meetings, committee meetings, work sessions. So you have those. And for things that are more discretionary, if you let whoever's handling the RSVPs know that you're attending, we can send you the calendar invite for that as well. One of the questions I had, would you like us to send a calendar invite for all of our special events, just so they're on, you can accept that and it gets automatically put on a calendar?
Send
Okay.
me everything.
Send you everything?
Send me everything.
Okay. The other thing that we're doing is that I'm able to layer on top of that, or we're able to layer on top of that, when your travel plans or conferences and things. And so I think it's really helpful in us trying to think out and plan out the work sessions. And next, on the 15th, we'll have kind of our first excursion into work sessions ahead of our legislative meetings. You'll see on that master calendar that we are trying to take advantage of that, because I know that is definitely a Wednesday night that you all preserve on your calendars. So on the 15th, and I'll be sending an email. The mayor and I have been talking about some additional information we want to get out, kind of about the budget process and maybe some budget priorities. I think as you look through that project matrix, there's a lot that's still going on. And there are a lot of really big picture. We were talking about this at staff meeting this week. We have a lot of these big boulder projects. And sometimes we don't get to spend as much time on those big boulder projects because of all the little sand projects that are filtering in around those, and just the administrative tasks, whether that is in the kind of the day-to-day business of running the city. So we're trying to do a better job of capturing for you kind of where we are and some of that push and pull that we have just in terms of timing and moving forward, so that we can make sure that we're meeting your goals and objectives, but that you also sort of understand you know, if we've had a slowdown in a particular project area, what's causing that, or, you know, what, if there are things that we can adjust. And so I think as I look at the project matrix and I think about the projects that we have coming in 2023 and probably many that are going to lapse over into 2024, I think they align pretty closely with council goals and objectives that, you know, that we've talked about. But we do want to take the opportunity ahead of kind of our formal jump into the 2024 budget process to just have a discussion on the 15th about those goals and objectives, where money has been allocated in 23, where we think we may need carryover funds, or how we think those projects might impact the 2024 budget, and then give you all an opportunity. I think for the last couple of years, we've kind of done a Survey Monkey tool. I don't think I'll probably do that, but we'll send out some additional information next week in preparation for that work session. And then at our meeting on the 15th, we will have a couple of special presentations. We will have, we're participating again in 2023 in the 7-day supportive city program. So we'll be issuing, the mayor will have a proclamation, and there'll be somebody from the 7 days organization here to accept that. We'll have someone from the JCRB AGC giving a presentation on the potential for looking at a resolution to adopt a working definition of anti-Semitism. That's something that's, you're probably hearing some of that that's circulating in many of our neighboring communities. A Fair Housing Month proclamation, kind of promotional process in the police department. So we'll have the work session in advance. We've got several special presentations, and then we will have an executive session at the end of the meeting on the 15th. So I think based on everything, although I did chuckle when you put the $5.2 million project on the consent agenda, but I think we'll get through our regular agenda pretty quickly, and it'll still be an efficient evening for all of us.
I just had a comment on the calendar piece. I was really impressed on page 60 of the F&A packet, the way that the calendar items are laid out. You know, you have the month underscored with, and the council events are mixed in a linear format with the special events format. And I would just like to throw out maybe on the Friday weekly calendar, seeing things in that order, because sometimes it's kind of hard to see the council things and then realize that there's additional dates that are maybe stacked next to them, just in different categories. So at the risk of council explaining to Robin about that, perhaps that's something.
But we'd love that.
Okay.
We would love that, because we could then just cut and paste out of this master calendar that we've already developed, rather than trying to go through the mental gymnastics every week of which one's a regular meeting. So if that makes sense to the rest of you, that's an easy transition that we can
saves you
make.
time too, even more of a plus. So
Well, you can color code them if you like, but.
Oh, well, the other thing that that we'll do is for the council liaisons to the boards and commissions, we'll get you those meeting invites as well. So those are just on your calendar, because every once in a while, because of some other holiday considerations, we've adjusted some PRT meetings. And I know we don't have liaisons to the planning commission, but some other things. And then just a reminder that in April, we have adjusted. So the committee meeting is on the second Wednesday. Just in thinking ahead.
Can I make one comment?
yeah, go ahead.
Actually, it's two things. So on the calendar, one thing, if we're talking about making things easier for everyone, one thing that I know would be much appreciated by staff is if we can be prompt and responsive with our RSVPs to those optional events, especially those that require RSVPs, because it's not a good use of Robin's time to be chasing after all of us. So if we can be respectful and responsive, that would be good. And then on the budget priorities, I know Laura said she'll send out a related email, but I did want to flag, you might have noticed that we didn't set a Q1 retreat, a sort of, full council priorities retreat. And Laura and I talked about that and felt like most of our priorities, especially given that we're the same group of people, are probably a carryover from this year, because we had a lot of really big, heavy lift items. And I haven't really heard throughout the year a lot of variation from that. But so when that email goes out, I think Laura's going to flag, what those items were last year. But so if you do see anything missing from that list in particular, this first budget work session Even if it's not an item of immediate budget impact, that would be a good time to flag if there are any priorities you think we're not capturing.
And I do think, so I do think kind of economic development as it relates to our relationship with our existing businesses, and economic development as it relates to an overview and potentially overhaul of our incentive policies are those two that we knew were sort of hanging out after last year's retreat. So I'll flag those as ones that are still, we need to have some additional conversation. And again, sort of thinking maybe about those mini retreat sessions about how to address those.
On the RSVP that you're mentioning, one of the things that to me is confusing, we get a lot of these invitations for regional events that are taking place, like a meal and the counties.
State of the county.
Yeah. The question I have is, do you want us to say, no, we don't want to be part of that? Or do you want us to just,
Yes.
okay,
Go to the list and see who's RSVP'd.
right,
Then probably gonna send you a follow-up. Because I want to know who wants to go. And I don't want to miss.
yeah,
So
because
just to know, you could, you want me to say no?
my thinking is that, like, for instance, that one I asked you about the table and the fact that it was cheaper to just do an individual than to buy a table. It didn't make sense to me logically. But if we have a table, if it's filled, I don't need to go, right? So it's kind of like, I wish I knew, are we buying a table? Are we not buying a table? Are we going
Well,
individual?
yeah, it's a little bit of a chicken and an egg.
I know it is. I know it is, but
Yeah.
the question is, I would prefer that somebody else get a chance to go. I don't really need to go.
I think you can note that in your RSVP. If this one's over full, I don't need to go.
Yeah. If you don't, yeah, if we're trying to fill a spot, I mean, so typically I think the things where we have the tables, you're going to look at the Education Foundation breakfast. You're going to look at the State of the City's luncheon and
Chamber Gala.
Chamber Gala. Which is one, please look at your calendars for anybody who's thinking about going to the NLC conference, which is in Atlanta. The Chamber Gala is the Saturday that overlaps with that. And I know it did that this year, but the conference was here in Kansas City. So look ahead to that and think about that. So I know unfortunately, it's just the NLC conference moves around enough that it's hard to predict when that's going to happen, but it definitely overlaps with the Chamber Gala this year. I will tell you that.
Question for you. When we're talking about RSVP, are you talking about when we receive an invitation from an outside place, we should RSVP to that? Or when we receive an email from you asking us if we're going, we should RSVP to that?
From me, because a lot of times I'm registering you all on one registration with my people are all at once. And we want to register all of you at the same time versus you all registering yourselves, and it's just easier, and then you don't have to use the word. Yeah, so if you get an invitation for something that I haven't sent, tell me and I'll send it to everyone, because that does happen sometimes too, especially with maybe.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any other comments? Yeah.
Thought you were done, didn't you? No, this comment is just for Trent. Congratulations, Trent. You have a baby coming tomorrow. And yeah.
Operating.
And this obviously goes for Mary as well, but everyone in this room I know wishes you and Helen the very best. And we're here if you need anything. Keep us posted, please.
Thank you.
We can come out.
There is, I don't.
It's 8:47 PM, and with no further discussion, that concludes this meeting of the Finance Administration Committee. Again, this video will be made public on our website at michiganps.org. Thank you.